Welcome in to Two Guys, One Pod, Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, reporter, joined by my co-host, Justin. Justin, we got through all but the last 5 running backs in our running back review. Those will be reviewed on a bonus episode. We are going to start having these little bonus episodes one time a week on top of our regularly scheduled
bonus
2 episodes a week. So that is where you will find the next 5. It's not really enough to fill up an entire episode. So we are going to trudge forward into our quarterback review. Are you ready?
To quote the great philosophizer, General Lee Patton Oswald III, I was born ready, and then I arrived, and I don't.
You haven't.
Where am I?
You haven't.
What's happening right now?
Read a lot of Patton, have you?
Patton Oswalt? Yeah, I read everything that he puts out.
Patton was an interesting guy. I would recommend just a little bit of a dive into who he was as a person. He was somebody. But anyways, we can move forward into this quarterback review and out of this Patton talk. Coming in at quarterback 24 on the season, we're going to review the top 24 quarterbacks, 12 in this episode, 12 in the next episode. Russell Wilson, Danger Russ, gets us kicked off. 204 fantasy points. He played in 11 games, 18.6 points per game, 336 passing attempts, 214 completions, 2,482 passing yards. That's low even for 11 games. 16 passing touchdowns. And then we've got some, I went a little wild with the stats here and the touchdown rates because I wanted to go back and look at how those compared historically, but we won't have to get into that right now. So we can use that for our broader discussion. But our rushing attempts, he had 43 for 155 yards and 2 rushing scores, and he threw 5 interceptions. What's the truth about Russell Wilson in 2025?
The truth about Russell Wilson in 2025 is that much like his Pete Carroll offenses under Darrell Bevell, he started out like gangbusters, and then he has certain tendencies. I mean, we know that he moonballs outside the numbers and down the sideline, and he had people believing that George Pickens was going to be a top 10 rest of season option because of that. He is going to force feed. He's going to force targets into like places where they shouldn't go. And he's not the most reliable actual game manager when it comes to clutch situations. All of those things are true about Russell Wilson. And I think that as he's getting longer in the tooth, the positive plays and the ability to play off schedule are diminishing in an alarming fashion. And his ability to make plays from the pocket that win you the game those were never his strengths, throwing on time and with schedule. That's why it was such a nightmare matchup with Sean Payton. So I don't know where I land. I know that he had told Adam Schefter and a couple other people that he planned on being back in Pittsburgh, and they were starting negotiations to make that happen. I don't know how I feel about that. He's still the best quarterback that George Pickens has ever played with. However, I don't know what that means for the ceiling of the team and them actually progressing as an offense and being useful.
Agreed. I think that Russell Wilson is relevant in as far as his offense is relevant. Like if he goes to the Raiders, I think that we might like it for Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers because it's probably the best quarterback they've played with. But I don't. That doesn't make me want to draft Russell Wilson. I don't think we have to spend too much time on him. Do you?
Absolutely not. We can go. We can keep it rolling.
Drake May, rookie Drake May, comes in at 23, 207 fantasy points, 13 games played, good enough for 15.9 points per game, 338 passing attempts, 225 completions, 2276 passing yards, 15 passing touchdowns, 54 rushing attempts for 421 rushing yards and 2 rushing scores. He threw 10 interceptions. As a Pats fan, I was paying a lot of attention to Drake May, especially bemoaning Jacoby Brissett starting the season. I didn't agree with it. It's going to be a learning season. You know the keys are going to be turned over to the car at some point. To Drake May, just let him get in there and take his licks and let him know, hey, you're going to suck. But this is going to be a learning season. Everybody knew it, and nobody wanted to come out and say it. And then whenever they finally let him have the reins, he looked good. To me, he passed the eye test. The 10 interceptions speaks to being a rookie, in my opinion. I have a lot of high hopes for Drake May moving forward based off of what I saw this year. He was in a Josh Allen type scenario without being Josh Allen. He had no receivers to throw the ball to. I mean, Hunter Henry was his best receiving option. So, when that is this, I don't
Don't
dislike Hunter
disrespect
Henry
the
as a
booty
receiving
warrior like
option.
that.
I mean, again, his number one receiving option was Hunter Henry. And as your number one receiving option, that ain't going to cut it. So,
Correct.
especially if you aren't Josh Allen. So, this was not a lost season by any means. To me, as a fan of the Pats, I love to see what I saw from Drake May. I could see a path for him being a very, 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 very good quarterback, possibly a Pro Bowl type quarterback. And that is not what I saw with Mac Jones ever. It was going to be a timing. It was going to be game manager. It was going to be somebody who didn't make a lot of mistakes, 202 type numbers. Drake May has a gun for an arm. He has a backup that's going to push him in Joe Milton. Joe Milton looked really good. He has. I think that if we get him a weapon on the outside, somebody like a Tet McMillan or any of these guys that might, Emeka Ibuka, anybody that could be drafted in the first round, if we could get just a solid prospect, I think he's going to have a great next year. It just didn't. He was a good streaming option at times, but he was a rookie. He was a rookie on a team with no pass catching options, so he was limited.
I think that if you were to place grades on, let's say, situation that they were placed into, and then performance based on performance, uh, situation adjusted performance grade. So situation that he steps into, F. Situation adjusted performance grade, A minus. I was thoroughly impressed with Drake May this year. He showed us a rushing floor and mobility. People said Josh Allen light coming out, and I was like, bro, there's no way. There's absolutely no way that this guy from North Carolina with terrible footwork and just he was raw, but he was still so young. And he what I misunderstood was his ability to create plays to be made. Like, for instance, the play against the Titans, my Titans, where he just scrambled around and scrambled around and scrambled around, and then finally hit Ramondre Stevenson in the end zone. Those are things that there are very few quarterbacks in the league that can do. And so I enter into 2025 with my eye keenly trained on that Patriots situation for Drake May, because I think that this is a guy that has probably a top 6, if not higher ceiling.
I agree. And we can look pie in the sky as long as we want, but uh, you know, I'm not going to besmirch my own guy. But at the end of the day, he was a rookie. He was in a terrible situation. Um, Vrabel coming in as the head coach, it is very much the Patriot way. We're going to hire somebody that we know. We're going to, and what Vrabel brings to the table is going to be consistency. It's going to be a not making mistakes. We're not going to kill ourselves with how we play the game of football. And I'm not sure if that's going to really unlock Drake May, but it might limit some of his mistakes, a la 10 touchdowns in 13 or 10 interceptions in 13 games.
Ryan Tannehill accounted for a 40 touchdown season under Mike Vrabel.
Agreed, and that was by far, besides the one time that he was a borderline MVP candidate, that was an outline for all of Tannehill's career. Was that not A.J. Brown's rookie year?
No, that was A.J. Brown's second year.
Okay, so I mean that has something to do with it right there. That helps out quite a bit.
I mean, A.J. Brown had 100 targets that year.
Right. So you have a talent in A.J. Brown going into his second year, and you only give him 100 targets.
Yeah,
Like that was the Vrabel offense. I mean, it wasn't Vrabel's offense. It was Arthur Smith at the time, correct?
correct.
Yeah. So, but I mean, Vrabel's obviously okaying what's happening, and he was okay with AJ Brown, one of the best receivers we've seen in 10 years, getting 100 targets in his second year, and what most would consider time for a breakout year. And it was a breakout year, and he still only got 100 targets.
All
So
that being
that I
said,
think
my point was there's room for exponential growth even if the opportunity is going to be limited because I believe in the talent and I think that there's still a ways to go defensively for the Patriots to where you could find yourself with a Drake May putting up numbers like he did in those blowout games towards the end of the season because the defense isn't in a spot to where they're able to stop people and he's most likely finding himself in situations where he's down multiple scores and the defense is playing less aggressive to try to make them string the ball out or string the clock out to get a score. So those are kind of the things that I'm holding on to now. Obviously, your point is very valid. We've talked about what Mike Vrabel does, but as a Titans fan, I wanted to point that out because Tannehill had multiple seasons of fantasy relevance under the tutelage or guidance of a Mike Vrabel led team. So I don't think that he's just gonna take the air out of the ball and run it a billion times because he doesn't have a Derrick Henry. So we shall see.
that's fair. Kirk Cousins comes in at quarterback 22, 212 fantasy points, 14 games played, 15.2 fantasy points per game. And I'm sure we'll touch on it. Actually, I'll just go ahead and touch on it now. That 15.2 points per game is absolutely buoyed by two games against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like those are his freaking life raft. It is disgusting how many points into that points per game are from those two matchups. But he did put up 15.2 points per game. 453 pass attempts, 303 completions, 3,500 yards, which is not nothing to sneeze at. 18 passing touchdowns, that's terrible. But 23 rushing attempts for 0 yards. 0 yards and 16 interceptions. So nearly a 1-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. Bad year by Kirk Cousins. The Achilles tear is undefeated. We'll talk about Aaron Rodgers also today, and he wasn't very good either, but he was better than Kirk Cousins. It's a low bar. Kirk Cousins replaced at the end of the season by Michael Penix, and uh, they say there's a showdown happening because of the contract situation between Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. It's not a showdown. His contract's fully guaranteed. He's going to be either the highest paid backup in the league or he's going to be on a different team next year who will most likely be paying some part of that salary.
Yeah, this is hilarious. This is just hilarious to me because everybody was so bullish on Kirk Cousins coming off the Achilles, and it's just I don't understand. I just don't understand why we couldn't just temper the expectations a lot. Like just a little bit, not even a lot. Just temper the expectations some for a 36-year-old quarterback that's coming through, I coming through into a new system and he's been better for fantasy than he's been a real life quarterback. Hey, all pro human being, mid quarterback. I mean, he's in the Bermuda Triangle of Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins. So I don't. It's hilarious that this is where he's landed because he's an all pro businessman as well. So I don't really know I don't really know how exactly to. I know I don't want him anywhere near my franchise, and that's about the best thing that I could say about that.
Yeah, we don't have to spend much time on Kirk Cousins. The Super Bowl champ beating Kirk Cousins. That's something that we should add to his resume. But we can move on to Tua Tagovailoa. Comes in at 21 on the season, 219 fantasy points, 11 games played because he can't keep his head attached to his shoulders. 20 points per game, 399 passing attempts, 291 completions, 2867 in the yardage department, 19 passing touchdowns. 17 rushing attempts because he finally figured out that he shouldn't be doing that for a negligible amount of yardage, and 7 interceptions. What is to me, Tua is radioactive. I am not touching Tua. I am not getting anywhere near him, and that is not a doubt in the talent. That's a different argument. I also think he's bad. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But the reason I'm not touching him in drafts in 2025 is because this can happen. He can play 10, 11 games, and even the games that he's there, it's like it's impossible to predict when he's good. His wide receiving core is either inconsistent or hurt or unpredictable, a la the emergence of Geno Smith. I am out on Tua Tagovailoa into 2025, and that's looking at the stats, looking at the games that he missed, looking at what he did when he came back. I'm out.
I don't have any other analysis. I don't have any other analysis other than that. Yeah, I would be. Pardon me. I would be out. I don't really have a reason to. I don't have a reason to have a ton of confidence. I don't have a reason to go back and believe that something that isn't there is there. And he's a pocket quarterback that's not great from the pocket, and he doesn't run. So the ceiling is what, quarterback 11? Is that his best career finish?
I mean, are we 1 year removed
Yeah,
from
and
him
what did
leading the
that
league in
amount to? Like
passing?
quarterback 11?
I think it was quarterback 8, but I can look it up real quick.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. I'm pretty sure. So I
Yeah,
think,
it was quarterback 9.
yeah, quarterback 9. So that's your ceiling, and your floor is he might never play football again. So I'm out. No, thank you.
Agreed. And I find the next guy much more interesting to talk about, so we can move on. Bryce Young at 20, 225 points, 14 games played,
Bama Bryce.
16.1 points per game, 384 passing attempts, 234 completions for 2,400 yards and 15 touchdowns, 43 rushing attempts for 249 yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. That is all right. We haven't talked about this yet, but this is a good time too. I put in here rush TD rate, as far as like your rate versus of touchdowns scored versus how many times you're actually rushing the ball. He, of the quarterbacks we're going to talk about for the series of the truth of these quarterbacks, he has the highest rush TD rate of all 24 quarterbacks. Something, I mean, because rushing is so heavily scored for the quarterback position in fantasy football, him having that high a TD rate with was it 6 rushing touchdowns? No, 9. Was that, did I have that right? No way.
Six
No,
rushing
that's right. 6
touchdowns.
rushing touchdowns. Sorry, I
Yeah.
did the stats. I've got to stretch some of my columns, and I've got interceptions at the end. So I had rush TD rate and then interceptions. So I was like 9. That doesn't seem right. But
That's
6
a
rushing
lot.
touchdowns. Yeah, that was. But for his rushing attempts to score 6 rushing touchdowns, something to keep your eye on as we move into 2025. You've been a Bama Bryce guy for a while. It was a rough year and a half, but all it took was about a year, not a year, about 8 months of Dave Canales, and he finally got his head on his shoulders.
Well, imagine that we don't just write off a quarterback because he starts off poorly. That was my whole point this whole time to everyone. Anyone's listened to the show. Rick was even bought in because of Dave Canales early, and it was so bad that Bama Bryce got benched, and we weren't seeing Bama Bryce. But then, after he got benched, Bama Bryce was like, "Oh, my." You start listening to Eminem, He's like, there's vomit on my sweater already. Mom's spaghetti. He's nervous, but on the surface, he looks calm and ready. And then he just started dropping bombs, and he kept on forgetting. And he just went out there and he just kept balling over and over and over again to the point where he was so confident he threw a no-look pass on the road in overtime and beat the Falcons to keep them out of the playoffs. Like, he finally put it together, and it was glorious. And I got made fun of in the FF Dynasty last night because I took him in the 5th round. I took him in the 5th round of a startup, and I'm fully bought in. I mean, he's with the quarterback whisperer. He's finally put on tape the number 1 overall pick stuff. He's not one of the short guys that can't throw over the middle of the field like Kyler and Russell Wilson. He's a short guy that can throw it anywhere on the field, and he finally is throwing the ball with conviction. So yes, I'm in on Bama Bryce. You can tell me that I'm crazy. I'll tell you I'll put my stinking tinfoil hat on.
Yeah, I mean, if you're wearing a tinfoil hat, get some out of the little Reynolds wrap box for me too, because I am like I said, like you said, Dave Canales turned Geno Smith into something. He fixed Baker Mayfield. It took him a few weeks with Bryce, but he got him back. And that TD rate of 3.91% is weighted extremely low because of how the season started, and even his first couple of weeks back after the benching of Andy Dalton. It was much, much better if you actually watch the games. You're like, oh, nah, this guy is really good. So it was good to see him rebound like that. But we can go on to quarterback 19, Matthew Stafford, 254.6 fantasy points, 16 games played, 15.9 points per game, 517 pass attempts, 340 completions, 3,762 passing yards, 20 passing touchdowns, 30 a negligible rushing amount. Okay, we don't have to talk about that. It's just it's ridiculously
You just decided not to read it?
ridiculous though. It's 30 rushing attempts for like 48 rushing yards. I don't know what we're doing here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh, yeah,
We're fine
no.
here. Matt Stafford. I mean, we have talked about some pocket passing quarterbacks offline about guys we are targeting in best ball drafts because those are the drafts that are going on right now. Those are what we will be mostly focusing on pre, into, and post draft season, for like the NFL draft season. So Matthew Stafford hasn't come up in those conversations one time, and I don't think that he will. And I'm willing to put my stamp on it that Matthew Stafford will not be a top 12 quarterback in 2025.
Yeah, I can't find myself drawn to a guy with a floor like this, and you're counting on a massive outlier season in order to have him be fantasy relevant. So I was assuming that he would be a guy this year, coming into this year, that would experience massive touchdown spikes because of the fact that they had Puka Nacua and Puka Nacua and Cooper Cup.
Cooper
Cooper
Kupp?
Cup's now on the
There we go.
now on the trade block. See, I've already deleted Cooper Cup from my Rams database, and I thought this would be a high flying offense. It turns out that they really just kind of handed it over to the new guys in Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua, and just took the air out of the ball for the most part. I think Matthew Stafford threw 1 passing touchdown in the last 3 games of the regular season. So I have no desire to own Matthew Stafford, and we can move on from this if you want.
CJ Stroud comes in at 18. He goes for 260 fantasy points, all 17 games played for 15.3 fantasy points per game, 532 passing attempts, 336 completions, 3,727 passing yards, 20 passing touchdowns, a touchdown rate 3.76%. That's almost a point and a half under league average. 52 rushing attempts for 233 rushing yards and no rushing scores. An utter failure of a season for CJ Stroud this year, having played all 17 games.
This is the floor. This is a sophomore slump. This is what happens when you don't prioritize in the inner pocket protection and your $100 million left tackle regresses out of nowhere. CJ Stroud was under duress for the majority of the year, and I think for a young quarterback, I think that he started to quote unquote see ghosts and not really be able to deliver the ball with conviction and confidence. We saw his accuracy wane quite a bit just throughout the season. And I think that this is a guy who's a good real life NFL quarterback with a limited ceiling fantasy wise because he doesn't run, and if the touchdowns regress, he's just not going to be able to contribute very much to your team. So there's 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 a possibility that you can take this guy late in drafts. We were telling you guys last year, do not draft CJ Stroud under any circumstances at quarter at his ADP. And hopefully you listen to us because this was more likely of an outcome than him finishing as the QB5.
Agreed. I view him and Matthew Stafford in the same light. But Matt Stafford had some very usable weeks streaming wise, and it seemed like CJ Stroud was a consistent like 180 to 200 yards and maybe a passing touchdown, maybe some rushing yardage, like just enough to get you to a point total that was really uninspiring. So, yeah, unless they add a piece in the offseason, so Tank Dell is going to be missing all of 2025. What's the status on Diggs? Did they have him for another year?
They could, but all of his money was front loaded into his contract, restructured for all of his guaranteed money to be moved into the 2024 season so that they could part ways with him or he could part ways with them to go seek a new contract.
So that'll be interesting to follow in the offseason, see what pieces they add or delete from their offense. But if they don't add another pass catcher there besides Nico Collins, who is awesome, by the way, Nico Collins is fantastic, but he needs, like, CJ Stroud needs somebody else to be relevant for fantasy. And unless he gets that, I'll be out again this year, or excuse me, next year. This next guy, Jordan Love, comes in at 17. He goes for 283.9 fantasy points, 15 games played, 18.9 points per game, 425 passing attempts, 268 completions, 3,389 passing yards, and 25 passing touchdowns. That's going to be the most passing touchdowns until we get up until, I think, QB 14. He was a very efficient passer of the ball when it came to throwing touchdowns, coming in at 5.88%. The league average was 5.06. I think most people would say that Jordan Love had a regression of a year versus what he produced last year. His touchdown percentage actually went up, meaning for the passes that he threw, he completed more of them for touchdowns this year than he did last year. He just threw less because they had this other guy named Josh Jacobs who was able to rush in 16 of those around the goal line. And also, he had a rotating carousel of guys at wide receiver who may or may not catch the balls that he was throwing at them. On the ground, excuse me, let me get back on the correct line here. 25 rushing attempts for 83 yards and 1 score, so not a real threat on the ground. He added 11 interceptions on this year, which was a bit of a spike from last year as well. He's got a bit of that Brett Favre in him, but this offense projects to be good. It's hard to say that he is going to do wildly better than this while Josh Jacobs is still on this team, though.
Agreed on all fronts. I think that the important thing to note here with this offense is the fact that they were dead last or second to last in pass rate over expectation from I want to say week 6. Whenever they started going on their winning streak and feeding Josh Jacobs the ball, that was when he absolutely just took the air out of the ball. Was averaging about 24 attempts a game, and if I'm not mistaken, he had the same amount of interceptions last year as he did this year with less touchdowns. So he's thrown 11 touchdowns in back-to-back years, and he does. This is just part of the experience. He is way more. He is way more Brett Favre than he is Aaron Rodgers. Although he does have the arm strength of both, but the decision making skews way more towards Brett Favre than it does Aaron Rodgers in protecting the football. So yeah, this is another guy that unless he's going to have an outlier touchdown season or start off on fire like he did this year, I can't bring myself to draft him or be in on him in any way, shape, or form moving forward.
Right, and one point of clarification, you had said touchdowns. I know you meant interceptions. I think everybody would understand you meant interceptions, but just it was 11 interceptions both years. When I said a spike, I was referring to the
Yes,
interception rate.
yes,
His
agreed.
attempts went down, and his
Yes,
interceptions stayed the same. So, okay, so we can move on. Caleb Williams comes in at 16, 294.5 fantasy points, 17 games played, 17.3 points per game, 562 attempts, 351 completions, 3,541 yards, 20 touchdowns, 81 rushing attempts for 489 rushing yards and 0 touchdowns. Tell us about your guy, Caleb Williams.
love it so much. So, I mean, he took care of the ball much better than I expected. This offense was about as putrid as you could possibly expect. He was delivering stats in garbage time environments, but guess what? They all count the same. And now he gets Ben Johnson, the assumed mastermind behind one of the most elite offenses in the NFL for the last 2 years. So, I think all the arrows are pointing up for him to hit 20 touchdowns with just 6 interceptions and then to add another 489 yards rushing. I think that this is I mean, I believe Caleb's going to finish as a top 12 quarterback next year. I'm really excited about what he could potentially bring. I mean, we knew that he was going to throw the ball, but he ran the ball at such a clip. And if we can take him from being the most sacked quarterback in the league to maybe like the 15th most sacked quarterback in the league, you could really start to see some special things because he's not just either holding the ball because no one's open or getting pummeled into the upside down by the defensive line.
Agreed. I made no bones about I don't care for Caleb Williams as a you know what? I don't know him. I didn't care for him in the pre-draft process, and I'll leave it at that. But these numbers speak for themselves. Pretty much when he got rid of Shane Waldron, or when the Bears did, he did do things in garbage time, and even outside of garbage time, it seemed like he could play well. The 489 rushing yards with 0 rushing touchdowns on 81 rushing attempts is a crazy outlier. I was talking to you and Jeff about that. There were 4 quarterbacks that had 80 rushing attempts or more. All of them scored at least 4 touchdowns, if not more, except Caleb Williams, and he had 0. If you give him 4, he jumps, I think, 2 spots. If you give him the average touchdowns that those guys scored that did rush 80 or more times, he jumps to like QB 10. If you put him in, I mean, there's a lot of ifs and buts you can play with that game, but it doesn't take a whole lot of actual critical thought to get him into the top 12. And then, oh man, let's add in Ben Johnson. Let's add in him getting more efficient. Let's add in him having a sophomore year breakout. I think that ceiling for Caleb Williams in 2025 would be QB 6. That might be a little hot. I wouldn't take him as QB 6 in a draft, but I'd be willing to take him as high as QB 8, and that's a lot coming from me.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild. Once you get pilled up against somebody, you stay there for a long time. So, do I need to know Diddy that one?
I don't think so. But we can move on to a guy that I actually do like in Brock Purdy. At 15, he had 306.9 fantasy points, 15 games played, 20.5 points per game, 455 passing attempts, 300 passing completions, 3,864 passing yards, 20 passing touchdowns, 66 rushing attempts for 323 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. I saw a stat the other day that there were 9 Pro Bowlers on the San Francisco team last year, and there was not a snap played in 2024 where all 9 were on the field together. Like some were on defense, so like obviously they're not on the field at the same time, but like they were never on the field for the same game. And that, to me, was indicative of this finish for Brock Purdy, and I will continue to bang the drum for him no matter this QB 15 finish. Deebo Samuel was hurt, and then he wanted off the team, or they wanted him off the team. I don't know what happened. Brandon Ayuk tears his ACL. George Kittle missed a game, I believe. Trent Williams was in the lineup for both health and personal reasons, and also Christian McCaffrey missed pretty much the entire season, and then their backup missed the last 4 games of this season, and their backup missed like 2 or 3 games at the end of the season. Like, this team was in shambles, and Brock Purdy's another guy that I'll be targeting as a pocket passer in best ball drafts.
Easy money. Easy money. I mean, he gave you 300 yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. And here's the thing. That's gonna the touchdowns may regress year over year. However, he's going to run the ball. He's going to create with his legs. And much in the way that we've talked about Baker being able to create, this is another guy who's going to be able to get out of the pocket and give you something on the ground. So I think that obviously we've seen the ceiling, the perceived ceiling, 4,231. So if we just get something, which because of his performance this year, he'll be drafted as probably QB 16, maybe QB, or maybe later. So I think that this guy's a tremendous value. And if they bring back the weapons and they stay healthy, I don't think that there's any question that you're getting a steal at his current ADP. So yeah, Brock Purdy is a tremendous value going into 2025, and I would stamp him for approval of a late round quarterback.
Geno Smith comes in at quarterback 14, 308 fantasy points, 17 games played, 18.1 points per game, 578 passing attempts, 407 completions, 4,320 passing yards. That's something that I just had blocked out of my mind for some reason, and 21 passing touchdowns. He added 53 rushing attempts for 272 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Geno Smith, I mean, Ryan Grubb came and gone, whatever. This was a 10-win team. This was not a bad team. I was surprised to see the coaching staff get gutted like it did after the season. But a lot of the team's success, and I guess you could say failures, was predicated on the pass game. And for him to throw for over 4,000 yards for the second time with his team, second time in 3 years, that's Geno is low-key surprising. I'm going to keep my eye on him, but does he pique enough interest to you to garner any kind of draft interest?
This is completely neurodivergent to me between real life NFL quarterback and fantasy quarterback. I want no parts of Geno Smith for fantasy next year. None whatsoever. If given the choice between he and Brock Purdy, I would choose Brock Purdy 10 times out of 10. And that doesn't feel great to say as someone who's been a Purdy denier. I just think that Geno Smith is one of the most inconsistent options you can have in your lineup that's going to hurt you more times than he helps you. And I would much rather take my frustration somewhere else and be frustrated there than ride the Geno roller coaster again.
Agreed. Yeah, that's about where I'm at. Like, I will let someone else, some other Seahawks fan, have him. I'm not all keyed up. Aaron Rodgers comes in at quarterback 13, 312 fantasy points. He gets 17 games played, 18.4 points per game, 584 pass attempts, 368 completions, 3,897 passing yards, and 28 passing touchdowns. That's kind of his thing. That's kind of what he does, and he just keeps on doing it. He did add 22 rushing attempts for 107 rushing yards. Where does he play football this year?
Man, I've seen rumors that Tennessee is a location, and I'm not sure that I'm okay with that.
Really?
I'm certain that I'm not okay with that.
You think a year removed from the go ahead. But
It was cool when it was, when it was happening to somebody else's franchise. Now I'm like, all right, stop it. Cut it out. It's not funny anymore. I don't want stop it, okay? I don't want this. I don't want it. So, yeah, and he's been my favorite quarterback of all time. And I just, man, it's time to go home and be an ayahuasca man. I don't just do something else. Hey, it was a good run. I don't think you're cooked. Like I think he's better than Kirk Cousins. That's a low bar to set. It's a really low bar to set. So I don't know what to make of him. I think that he's started to slip on his accuracy was the thing that made him so unique. His accuracy and then his ability to create in the pocket. Now both of those things it feels like he lost. Could it be because of injury that he was dealing with early in the season? Sure. It doesn't look the same. And I mean he's a 41-year-old quarterback, so it's not going to look the same. So all that being said, I don't really know where. I mean, I guess the Raiders are the rumor, but I can't really see him meshing well with Chip Kelly. And I don't know. I don't know. That's my analysis. Is that I don't know.
I think at this stage of the game, and this is a big fat I think, but we've kind of seen it borne out over the last 2 years. Uh, Aaron Rodgers is going to go somewhere where it's Aaron Rodgers' offense. Um, I don't think he's going to an established OC or someone that's actually going to try to make him play in a certain system. It's going to be new OC that is not well known or not known to be very good at their job. So like Raiders or Titans kind of makes sense, I guess. But and that wasn't like subtle shade. That was just kind of word vomit right there. I wasn't talking trash on your team. Just it's good. It's a new
We
OC this year, is
deserve
it
it.
not?
We were 3-14 this year. Say whatever you want. We deserve it.
Okay. That's I wasn't coming from that angle when I said that.
No,
Anyways,
I know.
the if he can go somewhere and be the guy there without any kind of oversight, I think that he'd be willing to play just about anywhere for 1 more year, 2 more years if he has success. But I think that the years of him throwing for 4,040 or the MVP, not even MVP seasons, but fantasy relevant on a consistent basis seasons are over, unfortunately.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I don't think that there's anything that I could add to that, brother.
All right, let's talk about at least one more, maybe two, and then we can have an extra long discussion about whoever's left on this list when we're done. Justin Herbert comes in at quarterback 12 on the season, 331.4 fantasy points, 17 games played, 19.5 points per game, 504 passing attempts, 332 good night, not receiving yards, pass completions, 3,870 passing yards, 23 passing touchdowns, 69 nice rushing attempts for 306 rushing yards and 2 rushing scores. Justin Herbert, we've talked about it. He's my guy. I love him dearly. He had as many interceptions in his playoff game. He had more interceptions in his playoff game than he did in the entire regular season. The first 4 games, they were limiting his opportunity. I will say that's both opportunity to make mistakes and opportunity to throw the ball at all. We saw pretty much past the first 4 games, Lad McConkey an extreme emergence. But Justin Herbert, like I said, I love him dearly. He's a very, 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 very good quarterback with a laser attached to his shoulder. And I think quarterback 12 could be, outside net of injury. Obviously, last year was the injury year, but net of injury, I think quarterback 12 is about as low as we'll ever see him.
I agree. I think that the unique thing about having Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator is that his rushing floor gets raised pretty significantly. And they used him on design runs because he's enormous. He's 6'6" and 235 or 240 pounds. And he's a football player. He's not just a quarterback that stands back there and operates. He's got all the tools to break back into that elite tier, that Burrow tier, the Dax finish there. There's not a reason why he can't be the guy in 2025 to finish in that tier. It does require him getting some people who don't have Kadarius Toney, Megan Fox thumbs, 4 fingers inside their gloves, though.
Agreed. If the amount of as you would say pilled up or Justin Herbert that I would be if they got T. Higgins, it would not be able to be measured. But that's just
Yeah, we're talking sound blind. We're talking sound blind, bricked up in the cement aisle for Justin Herbert. If they had a meaningful pass catcher.
I said that, and I lost all train of thought. I was like,
yeah. It's a fun thought exercise. It really is.
Would T. Higgins and Ladd McConkey be like what we always hoped Keenan Allen and Mike Williams would be as a pair?
Correct. Yeah. Just, hey, here are 2 elite options for 15 to 17 games. Show us what you can do.
Yeah, that don't occupy the same part of the field necessarily, but can do just about anything on the football field. This is all right. We gotta start talking about Justin Herbert.
I mean, they go get.
We gotta stop. I'm gonna.
It's gonna be more than 4 hours if you don't stop talking about Justin Herbert right now.
I'm gonna call a doctor, buddy. I'll tell you what. As soon as the news comes through that T. Higgins signs with the Chargers, you're gonna have to call my primary care physician. This is ridiculous. But
I'm gonna put out a wellness check just to see. Like, hey, I haven't heard from him since T. Higgins signed with the Chargers. I just want to make sure everything's
like
okay.
He's been in the bathroom for 8 hours.
This is not an emergency of any sort. Yeah.
Oh, but that's it. We're just about at time, so we won't get into Patrick Mahomes. But just to recap, we have talked today about Russell Wilson, Drake May, Kirk Cousins, Tua Tagovailoa, Bryce Young, Matt Stafford, C.J. Stroud, Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, Aaron Rodgers, and Justin Herbert. Pat Mahomes will headline the next set of quarterbacks at QB 11. Thank you all very much for listening, liking, downloading, subscribing, all that fun stuff, rating, reviewing. You can find us on socials at 2guys1pod FF on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, formerly known as Twitter, and TikTok as well. Also, we are on the Fantasy Sports Advice Network. I am Brick316, and Justin is at Chev90. Interact with us there. We appreciate it. We put out all kinds of fantasy content. Thank you all very much for listening. Have a great night.
Also, don't forget to never not forget that we also have the League Champ app available in the App Store or on Google Play. Download that. We'll be releasing a new version soon so that you guys can start to put your rankings together for 2025. And also as well too, PS also as well too. Remember, if you try to fade a generational talent, just make sure that it's not Malik Neighbors or Brock Bowers. Have a great night, everyone.